Hello everyone, I'm the Quiet F, and this is my recap of Tales of Wedding Rings. So, without further ado, let's recap. A boy is up on a tree trying to catch a beetle when he sees a blinding light right next to him, and the surprise makes him fall. When he gets close to the beam, he sees an old man and a young girl coming out of the light, and he thinks they are aliens, but they're actually human. The girl asks for his name, and he says it's Sato, says it's an unusual name, and introduces herself as Hime no Kana. Hime says that Sato cannot tell anyone about what he just saw, and it would be better if he actually forgot all about it. In exchange, Hime will be his friend. Sato thinks that back then, he felt a strong urge he would have to protect that girl for a long time. 10 years later, Hime wakes Sato up and says breakfast is ready, and it looks like a feast. Hime says she woke up early because she's excited, since it's the last day of school. While admiring her beautiful features, Sato thinks that it's already been 10 years since they've become friends and she moved next door with her grandpa, because her parents don't seem to be around. He looks at the ring on her necklace and gets flustered, saying that she has changed a lot since they started high school, because she used to be more low profile. But that attitude will make her stick out even more, especially because of her blonde hair. And also, she's a princess, so she has to be strong and stand out. When Sato asks what that princess thing is about, Hime looks at him and freezes. Suddenly, she comes really close as if she was gonna kiss him, but it was only a rice bean on his face. She picks it up and eats it, and Sato's embarrassment almost blows up the house. They leave the house, say good morning to Hime's grandpa, and go to school. Hime asks Sato if his father is coming home soon, but he says he's probably coming at the end of summer break, and Hime feels a little sad for him, but he says he's used to it. He takes a look at the rings again, and remembers what Hime has said about them when they were kids. She said the rings are really important to her, and she will give one of them to the person she marries. Then she asks Sato if he will marry her when they grow up. Back in the present, Hime catches Sato staring at the rings and says he can't have them, because they're really important to her, and she walks on laughing, while Sato thinks that's usually how childhood promises go. Then they have to run so they don't be late for school. At school, Hime brags about scoring 97 on the exam, and says a princess needs to be smart as well. A friend of Sato's complains that summer break is starting and he's all alone, and he envies Sato because he has a girlfriend to come to school with him every day, but he says they're just neighbors. His friends tell him not to be too comfortable, because when he finally decides to make a move on Hime, it might be too late, and they would definitely be with a girl as cute as her if they had one around. While his friends talk, he gets a text from Hime inviting him to the summer festival after school. She smiles at him from the front of the class, and he wonders if he can get his hopes up. In the evening, Sato meets Hime at the festival, and she wonders if her yukata had taken Sato's breath away. And when he says yes, she gets flustered and starts walking. Hime gets really excited at festivals, and she remembers the day they went there when they were kids and got lost. After that, Sato held her hand and said that this way they would never get separated from each other. He was her hero back then, and maybe he still is. They go get something to eat, and while she eats, Hime sees a shooting game tent and asks Sato to get the biggest prize for her. His shot is terrible, but his luck is apparently out of this world, because he manages to hit the target anyway. While they walk through the festival, he thinks that he used to be fine with the way things were with Hime, if it meant not ruining their friendship. But now, he is not sure this is enough. They climb the mountain to see the fireworks better, and Sato is building up his courage to make a move on Hime. But when he's about to declare to her, they got distracted by the fireworks. They're both glad they could watch the fireworks together, and Hime has something to say, something she was unable to tell him until now. Sato thinks she is about to confess her feelings, but she actually says she's going to move away the next day. They're going back to her grandpa's homeland, which is far away, and Sato is devastated. They go back home, and Hime says she's glad for the fireworks, the festival, the plushie, everything. He asks if there's a way to change things, but she only says she's made many good memories to take with her. Then she says goodnight and closes the door before Sato has a chance to say anything. Sato can't sleep, wondering if the place Hime was going was too far away. He looks back to the past and realizes he doesn't really know anything about her. He can't even remember the day he met her. Suddenly, a blinding light appears in the forest, and Sato remembers that something really weird happened the day they met. Hime is standing next to the light beam, and Sato comes running right before she enters it, asking her not to go. She's happy he remembers, so he must understand. She's not moving, she's going to a different world because she's getting married. After all, she's a princess, and that's how it is. She says goodbye and goes to the light. Sato thinks he didn't go there just to see Hime leave, so he jumps into the light as well. He falls right into the middle of Hime's wedding. Her real name is Crystal Novati Nokanatika, Princess of Nokanatika, and she is marrying the second prince of Gisaras, Marmargias Gisaras. The people are surprised with his presence, and right before the kiss that would seal the wedding, the father sees him and he calls for Hime. Before they could answer any question, a huge monster breaks into the church. It was a monster from the abyss, and it was after the princess' life. That's why she was hidden in another world. Hime's grandpa faces the monster, but he gets distracted with Sato's presence and gets hit. He realizes they would need the Ring of Light to defeat the monster, and orders Hime to give the ring to the prince. But the monster is right in front of Sato. Hime looks at the prince and then at Sato. Then she runs toward her childhood friend and kisses him. Lights shine and the church bell rings, and both the rings on Hime's necklace appear on their fingers. The prince understands what had just happened and tosses his sword to Sato, that starts shining as soon as he wields it. He doesn't know what to do, but he lets his instincts kick in and slashes the monster in half. The effort was so hard, he passes out immediately after. He wakes up with Hime by his side, and he jumps when she says they're in the royal couple's bedroom. She reminds him they shared a kiss, and he wonders if she really loves him. She says she was supposed to marry the prince, but she doesn't even know him, and she wanted to marry someone familiar, so when she saw Sato, she just went for it. She apologizes to him because she had just made him their hero. Meanwhile, the maids outside gossip about Sato coming from another world and becoming the Ring King. The people ask for an audience to see their new king. The wedding was meant to form an alliance between the Kingdom of Light and the Empire, and the common people think that the Emperor would be furious if he found out what happened. The prince says it's up to the Maiden of the Rings of Light to choose who is going to become the Ring King and save the world, and they were just following the tradition, so the Emperor's plans have nothing to do with it. Hime's grandpa, who is actually a sage, stops their bantering and asks them to leave, because there's more people who want to see the king. They walk outside and there are hundreds of people on the patio. The sage presents them the defeater of the abyss, bringer of light to Arnulus, the Ring King. The people have been waiting a long time for the return of the Ring King, and Sato is now their greatest hope. He looks at the people and screams that he is the one who came from another world to save them. He is their new king and new hero. At night, he's taking a bath, thinking he may have gotten too excited, when suddenly Hime walks in, completely naked. They're both embarrassed, and Hime says she had to go there because she didn't have a choice, since they're technically newlyweds. She tells Sato to not look at her and throws a bucket at him. They sit next to each other and Hime apologizes, because she knew about everything that would happen after she gave him the ring. That had nothing to do with him, but she dragged him into it anyway. He says things will be fine, because this is their summer break, and he's the Ring King, the one chosen by the Maiden of Light herself. Since that was Hime's world and she needed to be there, Sato will stay there too. The monsters were after her and the ring, and only Sato could protect her now, so he's going to stay by her side. She remembers a time when they were kids and other girls would pick at her, and Sato was always there to protect her. He has always been her hero after all. He catches Sato looking at her goods and tells him their marriage was only for convenience, and she only chose him by impulse, so he doesn't need to take it seriously. Sato says he's happy she chose him, and she asks if he really likes her. He says yes, he likes her as a dear friend, but it is clear that both of them know there's more to it than they care to admit. The bell rings alarmingly, and Sato jumps up, accidentally letting Hime see his goods. But they don't have time to get embarrassed because monsters are attacking the castle, going after the Ring King. They run toward the soldiers with their clothes all messy, and the guards think they were interrupting something. One guard says there are several monsters from the abyss attacking the castle and asks for his help. Sato doesn't know how to fight, but as long as he has that ring, the people need him to. He accepts the task and picks up an axe, which he barely can hold. The sage says the ring grants him strength and bestows the light of purification upon whatever he holds. The axe starts glowing and becomes a perfect weapon to fight the abyss. Sato doesn't know much about the world, just that it means a lot to Hime, and that's enough reason for him to fight. Hime kisses him again and he gets ready for battle. A monster of the abyss is attacking a maid, and Sato comes in and slashes it in half. It's the third one he kills, and he wonders how he could do that because the first time he fought, he passed out after killing just one. The sage explains that it was the kiss he shared with Hime. The bond they have as husband and wife translates into power because of the ring, and it's the princess's duty to provide strength to the king in battle. It still won't last that long, but that is why the sage Alabaster is there to heal him. While they talk, a different monster appears in the sky. The sage is scared because that was a knight from the abyss, and when Sato charges, he yells at him to stop, but it's too late. The knight attacks and a gust of wind sends Sato flying, breaking his axe. The sage says they must run, and they storm to the castle while the knight sends two monsters after them. A Knight of the Abyss is a terrible monster capable of using powerful magic, and it being there is a sign that they really fear the Ring King. Alabaster uses his magic and casts a huge stone wall to block the monster's path, but the knight has already caught up with them. Then the prince appears, covers the monster with a blanket and sets it on fire, asking him to run because his carriage is waiting outside. He is worried about Hime, but she is already out. Hime is crying from happiness now that Sato is safe. The prince says they let the monsters reach the inside of the castle, so he had to escape with the princess. Sato thanks him, but he can't pronounce his name, so he says he can call him Marse. Marse asks the sage if the kingdom will be alright. He says the Abyss King is after the rings and the Ring King himself, and when he finds out they're not in the castle, he's probably going to let it alone and begin a search for Sato. But he's worried it's gonna be hard to defeat the monsters without the power of the light, which means only Sato can do it. He still doesn't have enough power to do that, and that's why they had to run. In order to gather enough power to fight the Abyss, Sato needs to possess the other 4 rings. And to do that, he has to marry the other 4 princesses who hold them. He is not sure this is okay, and Hime is even more worried about it. But this is what being the Ring King is all about. They get to an inn where there were only 2 empty rooms. They argue about who is going to sleep with who, but the obvious choice is that Sato and Hime should sleep together since they're a couple. Before going to sleep though, they have to discuss the duties of the Ring King. Long ago, the world was on the verge of succumbing to the dark powers of the Abyss. The hearts of mankind were nearly broken from the endless assault of evil, and many nations were covered by the shadow of death and loss. The Ring King sought to dispel that darkness, and so he forged rings imbued with magic. The 5 rings were the rings of light, fire, water, wind, and earth. With their power, the Ring King fought a long and grueling battle, ultimately defeating and sealing away the Abyss King. Afterwards, the 5 princesses married to the Ring King passed the 5 rings down through the generations within their 5 nations. The set of 5 rings served as proof of the bond between the Ring King and those princesses. And now, the Abyss King has revived and is slowly regaining his power. The duty of the Ring King is to once again obtain the rings from each of the 5 princesses and use their power to seal the Abyss. When Sato and Hime get to the bedroom, Hime says Sato doesn't need to worry about what Alabaster had said. The marriages are just a formality. He is about to answer when he feels a sting of pain, and Hime asks him to take off his shirt. He has bruises all over, and Hime thinks it was her fault because she was the one that chose him. She runs away and Sato follows her, but he finds Marse instead, and he said he just saw the princess pass by. He says he's grateful that she chose Sato because he was not looking forward to becoming the Ring King. Sato had come from another world just to be there for the woman he loves, and this was no easy feat, so Marse says he should be proud. He says the princess is probably in the garden, and Sato rushes there, while Marse wishes he had Sato's courage. Hime was really in the garden. Sato calls her and declares his love for her. He is there because he decided to go there. It was his choice, and Hime should not feel responsible for that. Hime wishes she had his resolve. She tried to forget her time in his world to fulfill her duty as maiden of the Ring King, and she was even going to marry a guy she didn't know just to save her world. But when Sato appeared, all of her resolve was gone, because she realized she could marry the man she loves. But he would also become the Ring King and have to marry 4 other princesses, and she doesn't want to see the man she loves do these things. Despite all that, she's willing to steal her resolve and fulfill her duty to Sato and the ring as his real wife. Then she asks if Sato will take her as a wife one more time, and he of course says yes. They go to their room and are both really embarrassed because all of that scene has built up the mood for them to do it. Hime says she's ready to be his wife, and Sato makes a move on her. She is lying on the bed and Sato is ready to kiss her, and do more than that. But then he backs away. Hime asks what's wrong, and he says their first time together is supposed to be sweet, and not going with the flow like that. He would not let 10 years of crushing on her go to 8 like that. They went from 10 years of being friends to getting married, so he says they should slowly enjoy the married life. Hime agrees and kisses him, but they were so nervous they couldn't sleep, and Alabaster is disappointed at them because they didn't do anything, even though they've built up the mood so much, which means he was secretly watching them the night before. He explains that what makes the Ring King really powerful are the bonds he makes with his wives, so they must work hard to deepen their bond. Marse comes and gives them robes to hide their clothes. The clothes from the other world get too much attention. The sage says their first stop will be the hidden village of the elves, Romka. The Ring of Wind is passed through the elves' royal family, but even better than that. According to the sage, elves are a truly beautiful race. and that should really get Sato motivated. But he assures Hime that she is his real and only wife. Meanwhile, in Romka, the elven princess is disgusted by the Ring King, a man from another world. The land of the elves lies nestled in a deep valley that was once viewed as a sacred place where all the knowledge of the world was gathered. However, 50 years ago, Romka was surrounded by a wall of storms that came out of nowhere, and it forbids other races from entering the land. It also lifts up Hime's skirt. The last time Alabaster was there was no wall of wind, which means it was a long time ago. Suddenly, a huge bear appears from the forest behind them, and Sato foolishly tries to get close to it, resulting on the bear getting angry and forcing them to run away. They come face to face with the beast in front of the hurricane, when they hear a voice calling them and offering a place to hide, while the bear goes flying because of the storm. They meet two elves who ask what are humans doing there, and the sage thanks the duo for saving them. Sato says he's the Ring King, and he has come to meet their princess. Hime gets scared because there's no guarantee the nations will be cooperative toward the Ring King, but the elves say they're gonna take them to the palace. But they're not sure things are going to work out for Sato. For safety, they have to go through the roots of a tree in order to reach the village, because the little monsters who can cross it don't cause any harm, and the big ones are driven away by the wind. They arrive at the city and enter the palace, and Sato promises Hime he's only doing this to save the world, no matter how beautiful the elven princess is. The doors open, but there's no one at the throne to welcome them. Then, Hime spots someone behind the throne. The princess timidly asks if Sato is the Ring King, which he confirms. And, since Sato and Hime are married, she asks if they've already done it. They get nervous because they think she's asking about them sleeping together, but she actually wants to know if they've already kissed. Sato is flustered, but Hime puts herself together and says that the Ring of Light is already on his hand, and now they seek the Ring of Wind to drive away the Abyss King. But the princess is disgusted, because, according to her, touching each other's lips is a nasty thing to do. Then she runs away from the throne room, leaving everyone confused about what the heck had just happened. Sato and Hime don't understand why the princess ran away like that. Another elf appears and explains that's how the princess is, and it will be difficult to get the ring from her. This guy is Jade Romka, eldest son of the previous Wind King Romka, and older brother to the Princess Nephritis Romka, the princess who had just run away. He faces Sato and orders his guards to surround him and take him into custody, while the rest of them will be treated as state guests. They put Sato in jail, and Jade says the princess is very delicate. And when Sato says she's timid and immature, the prince gets mad at him, saying Nephritis is an angel, pure and kind, and even though she's timid, she loves her brother and is a good girl. She had never left the city or even the palace, because she has her reasons. So she's not accustomed to outsiders. And she is only 54, which is a young age for elves, and it's too early for her to get married. As her older brother, Jade will be watching over her growth, so he needs Sato to wait there patiently until she's ready to marry him. He thinks 80 years are enough for Nephritis to mature, but Sato is desperate because he will die of old age if he waits that long. A guard asks if Jade is okay with that, but he says he doesn't care about the so-called Abyss King. As long as they have the Tempest Wall, the city is safe, so the most important thing is to protect the Wind Ring, which is responsible for that power. It's been 3 days since Sato was arrested, and he wonders if the prince is really going to hold him there. Then, a beautiful and mysterious elf appears in front of him, asking him to stay quiet. She wants to know what he plans to accomplish by gathering the 5 rings: world peace, absolute power, or maybe beautiful princesses. He says that the only one he cares about is Hime, and his wish is for her to be happy. The woman likes the fact that he's gonna use the power of the ring to protect only one woman. She puts her hand on the wall and a secret passage opens up, and she tells Sato to follow her. He wants to know why she's helping him, and she says she's the one responsible for Romka's future, and only the Ring King can oppose the Abyss King. But even though Prince Jade knew all of that, he imprisoned him anyway, all because of the Tempest Wall, which, in her opinion, was a cage entrapping the elves. They walk through the passage and get to the Wind Room, the place where the Wind Ring, or Wind Regalia, was kept. There were 2 statues of elves, and each one had one of the rings on their finger. Sato asks why the ring is there instead of with the princess, but they see a movement and hide. It was the princess, hidden under a blanket. She gets out and starts talking to the statues of her parents, telling them about the Ring King. She says he's there to steal her and the ring, but she's never gonna leave the village. She'll honor her mother's command while they keep protecting the village. The woman explains that they're not actually statues. They are the petrified bodies of the king and queen of Romka, who gave away their lives to protect the village. The princess hears them talking and orders them to show themselves, and Sato obliges. The princess is so astonished she passes out, and Sato has to hold her. A guard approaches the room, and the woman says they have to leave, and tells Sato to take the princess with them. He is not sure this is a good idea, but she tells him to trust the elder of the elves. The guard tells the prince of Nefertiti's disappearance, and he is furious. Meanwhile, Sato is looking after her. The elder says she knows Nefertiti ever since she was born, and she's a strong girl at heart. She tells him that she'll accept a bit of forcefulness, and orders him to fulfill his duty and obtain the wind ring. Then she leaves him by himself with the princess. He admires her beauty, but he has to remind himself that he's there just for the ring. The princess wakes up terrified, and Sato tells her to calm down and that he's not gonna do anything to her. But she's so nervous, she throws up on him. The prince finds out Sato had escaped and is sure that Nefertiti's disappearance is his doing, when the elder shows up, saying that the Maiden of the Ring and the Ring King have eloped, and Jade starts trembling, unable to believe her words. The elder teases him, saying that his little sister ran away with the man she loved, and she's never gonna say "I love you" to him again. And he's devastated. She says it has always been the princess' duty to inherit the Wind Ring and give power to the Ring King, and his actions were never for the good of Nefertiti. He says the rings are still in their parents' hands protecting the village, and there's no need for Nefertiti to inherit them. Then he says he's gonna have the elder's manor checked to see if the princess is there. In the manor, Sato had washed both their clothes, and Nefertiti apologizes for the terrifying thing she did to him. She says he's really scary because she had never left the palace, so every outsider was scary, especially the Ring King from another world. He replies that even though he was from another world, he's not anyone special. He's just like the humans from this world. Nefertiti wants to know what kind of place his world is, thinking that it might be terrifying, full of orcs, goblins, and dragons. But he says there aren't any monsters, so it's very peaceful in this sense. She is sad to hear that there are no elves in his world, and Sato wonders if she's interested in it, given that the people called her a H0t princess and all. She says the fact that she is interested on the outside world doesn't mean she's not scared of it. She has always read about it, wondering what it looks like, feels like, smells like. She would get really excited reading all about it. But the real her could never go outside like that. Sato says he was the same. He didn't have anything special. He just wanted to be close to the woman he loved. So he took the chance and came to this world. And things worked out better than he expected. Nefertiti gets excited and says that one day she's gonna try to go to his world, and asks if he'll go with her. She got so caught up in the conversation, she forgot she was completely naked and they have to get away from each other. Sato asks her why she had never left the palace before when she was so excited to get to know the world. But when she starts talking, her brother's voice comes from outside, ordering her to come out. Sato says he became the Ring King to save Hime, and even though his duty is to gather the rings, he's not gonna force anyone to marry him. So it's up to Nefertiti to decide what she's gonna do with him. And she says she'll try her best, and her brother will understand as well. But she was terribly wrong. Jade orders Sato to get away from his sister, and she says the Ring King is not the kind of man he thinks he is. But her brother's mind cannot be changed. He says the rings are on their parents' hands, protecting the village, and that's what matters. When Nefertiti says she can't be protected forever, and that it's her destiny to inherit the ring one day, Jade gets furious and asks her if she's really going to betray their mother's wish like that, and she has no choice but to listen to him. Jade turns to Sato and asks if he's ready to face the consequences of not only escaping prison, but kidnapping the princess as well, when the elder appears, saying she was the one responsible for all of that. He says that there are limits, even for her, and she crossed them. But he did the same thing, treating the Ring King the way he did. She says she's gonna take care of Sato, and Jade won't interfere, but he tells him not to get close to Nefertiti ever again. Later, Hime makes sure Sato is okay after all of that, and he says he's fine. The only bad thing was spending 3 days in jail. Hime says it must be good to be rescued by a beautiful woman, and he even managed to get on good terms with the princess. She confesses she's jealous, but Sato says it's not a bad thing. The elder approaches them and apologizes for the late introduction, and she says her name is Peridot, and she is the eldest elf in Romka. Hime also introduces herself, and Sato asks Peridot if Nefertiti's parents have something to do with how she wound up like that. Then the elder tells them the story of how Romka became enveloped in a wall of wind, and why Nefertiti is like that now. Their mother wasn't the firstborn meant to inherit the rings. She had an older sister. In order to keep the ring inside the village, it was customary for the elven princesses to marry someone from within. However, the eldest princess fell in love with a traveler, a human one. The elves began to fear that if the traveler receives one of their rings, he might take it out of the village, and they were certain he only approached the princess because he wanted to steal the ring. Rumors began spreading through the village, growing into suspicion, then into conviction. The stronger the opposition towards the princess and the traveler, the stronger her feelings for him grew. Suddenly, the traveler stopped coming to visit her. Perhaps he was driven off in order to protect the ring, or perhaps he was erased. Alabaster and Marseille appears, and the sage says the rings of power are symbols of legitimate authority since the age of myth, and some are even used as proof of a nation's existence. At that time, the villagers were relieved, but they looked horrible to the princess who had just lost her lover so suddenly. The elven princess was so enraged and desperate, she laid a curse on the village and left it forever. May Romka be swallowed by the abyss. May the line of ring maidens come to an end, she said. Her words were heavy on the elves, who feared her revenge could strike at any moment of their long lives. The more years passed, the more the people grew consumed by fear, and the same happened to the royal family. Nefertiti's parents inherited the rings, but they also lived in fear of the eldest princess's curse. So, to keep the evil away from Romka, they used the power of the ring to erect a barrier of wind to protect the nation and their children. But they paid a great price. They made Nefertiti promise to never venture outside of the wall of wind. Now, Nefertiti wants to honor her parents' sacrifice. In her room, Nefertiti remembers her mother's last word. She said they would not be able to talk anymore, because her heart would stop. She made Nefertiti promise she would never leave the country, and, together with her husband, they cast their final spell. Well, that was Tales of Wedding Rings. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, hit the notification bell so you won't miss anything new. And I'll see you on the next video. Bye bye!